Life can change in an instant. For Sarah Mitchell, that instant came when her husband's truck skidded on black ice, sending her world into a tailspin of grief and uncertainty. At 32, she never imagined she'd be a widow, raising 3-year-old triplets alone in Montana's unforgiving winter. And for Jackson Reed, a solitary rancher who'd sworn off attachments after losing everything in his past, the sight of a woman collapsed in the snow with 3 small children would challenge every boundary he'd built around his heart. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. This is the story of how a chance encounter during a blizzard forced 2 broken souls to discover that sometimes family isn't what you're born into. It's what you build together from the ashes of your past. The wind howled across the Montana, plains like a wounded animal, driving snow horizontally against Sarah Mitchell's back as she struggled forward. Her 3-year-old daughter Emily whimpered from within the makeshift sling pressed against her chest, while Sarah clutched the hands of Emily's brothers, Ethan and Elliot, who trudged through the deepening snow beside her. "Just a little further," Sarah whispered, her voice nearly lost in the howl of the storm. "Remember what Mommy said? We need to find the big red mailbox." The truth was, Sarah had no idea if they were even on the right road anymore. When her old station wagon had sputtered to a stop 3 miles back, the gas gauge hovering just below. Empty, she'd made the decision that would either save her children or doom them, stay and freeze, or walk toward what she hoped was the direction of Pine Tree Valley, the small town that supposedly lay just beyond the ridge. 6 months ago, they had a home in Seattle. 6 months ago, her husband Michael had been alive, his laugh filling their small apartment as the triplets climbed over him like puppies. 6 months ago, before the accident, before the medical bills, before the eviction notice. "Mommy, I can't. You feel my fingers," Ethan said, his voice small and frightened. Sarah stopped, kneeling down in the snow despite the protest of her exhausted muscles. She removed her own gloves and placed them over Ethan's small red hands, tucking them under her arms to warm them. "Better?" she asked, forcing brightness into her voice. Ethan nodded, but his blue lips told another story. They needed shelter, and they needed it now. The letter from her late husband's cousin offering them a place to stay had been a lifeline, but now it seemed cruelly ironic. They would freeze to death trying to reach safety. "Mommy's going to carry you for a bit," Sarah decided, somehow finding the strength to lift Ethan onto her back. With Emily against her chest and Elliot's hand clutched tightly in hers, she pushed forward into the blinding white. They had been walking for what felt like hours when Sarah's foot caught on something buried beneath the snow. She stumbled, barely, managing to twist her body to protect the children as she fell. The impact knocked the wind from her lungs, and as she struggled to rise, a terrible realization washed over her. She couldn't feel her legs anymore. "Ethan, Elliot," she gasped, fumbling to check that Emily was still secure against her chest. We need to... The world tilted sideways. Through the curtain of swirling snow, Sarah thought she saw a light in the distance. A hallucination. Surely. Her limbs felt impossibly heavy, her eyelids drooping despite her desperate attempts to keep them open. "Stay awake," she commanded herself. "They need you to stay awake." The last thing Sarah remembered was pulling her children close, forming a protective circle with her body as the snow continued to fall around them. Jackson Reed didn't believe in fate. 15 years working his family's ranch alone had taught him that life was a series of hard choices and harder consequences. When his parents died, he'd chosen to keep the ranch running rather than sell it off. When his fiancée left him for the bright lights of Denver, he'd chosen solitude over chasing after her. And when the blizzard hit that afternoon, he'd chosen to ride out to check on the cattle in the north pasture, despite his foreman's warnings. Now, as the light faded from the sky and the temperature plummeted, Jackson guided his horse, Rusty, back toward the warmth of the ranch house, cursing his stubbornness. The cattle had been fine, huddled together in the lee of the ridge where the wind couldn't reach them. All he'd accomplished was to nearly freeze himself half to death for nothing. Rusty snorted, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air as he picked his way carefully along the snow-covered path. Jackson trusted the horse's instincts more than his own in weather like this. The animal had an uncanny sense for finding the way home, even when visibility dropped to near zero. They were passing the old Simmons property, abandoned since the old man died 2 summers ago, when Rusty suddenly stopped, ears pricked forward. "What is it, boy?" Jackson murmured, leaning forward in the saddle to peer through the swirling snow. Rusty whinnied softly, shifting his weight from side to side. Then Jackson saw it, a dark shape in the snow just off the road, partially covered by the fresh powder. His first thought was that it might be an injured deer, but as he dismounted and approached cautiously, the shape resolved into something that made his blood run cold. A woman lay curled in the snow, and nestled against her were 3 small children. "Jesus Christ!" Jackson breathed, dropping to his knees beside them. He brushed snow from the woman's face, pressing his fingers to her neck to check for a pulse. It was there, but faint and irregular. The children were bundled in layers of clothing, their faces buried against their mother's body. "Hey," Jackson said, gently shaking the woman's shoulder. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered but didn't open. One of the children, a little boy with a red knit cap, stirred and looked up at Jackson with wide, frightened eyes. "Are you an angel?" the boy whispered. "Mommy said angels watch over us." Something twisted in Jackson's chest. "Nobody. I'm just a neighbor. What's your name?" "Elliot," the boy said. "Mommy fell down. She said we had to rest, but I think she's really sick." Jackson nodded gravely. "I think so too. Are these your brother and sister?" Elliot nodded. "Ethan and Emily. We're triplets. That means we were born on the same day." "I know what triplets are," Jackson said gently. "Listen, Elliot, I need to get you all somewhere warm. My house isn't far from here." Jackson quickly assessed the situation. The woman and all 3 children were suffering from exposure, possibly hypothermia. His ranch house was closer than town, and in this weather, waiting for help wasn't an option. With careful movements, Jackson lifted the little girl, Emily, first, tucking her inside his heavy sheepskin coat. He whistled for Rusty, who obediently approached. "Elliot, I need you to be really brave right now," Jackson said, placing the boy on the saddle. "Hold onto Rusty's mane just like this. He's a good horse and he won't let you fall." After securing Elliot, Jackson retrieved the second boy, Ethan, who remained unconscious. He tucked him inside his coat alongside Emily, their small bodies providing each other warmth. Finally, he turned to the woman. She was slender, but dead weight in her unconscious state. With a grunt of effort, Jackson hoisted her over his shoulder. "In a fireman's carry. All right, Rusty," he murmured to the horse. "Slow and steady. Let's get these folks home." The journey back to the ranch house took twice as long as usual. Jackson trudged through knee-deep snow, one hand keeping the unconscious children secure inside his coat, the other gripping Rusty's reins as the horse carried Elliot and helped break a path through the drifts. By the time the lights of the ranch house came into view, Jackson's muscles burned with fatigue, his face numb from the cold. His foreman, Bill Parker, must have been watching for him because the front door flew open before they reached the porch. "Good Lord, Jackson!" Bill exclaimed, rushing forward. "What the hell?" "Found them by the Simmons place," Jackson panted. "Hypothermia. Need to warm them up slowly." Bill, a Vietnam veteran who'd worked for the Reed family since before Jackson was born, assessed the situation with a quick glance and took charge. "Get them inside. I'll call Doc Wilson on the radio, see if he can make it through this weather." The next hour passed in a blur of activity. The ranch house, usually quiet and orderly, transformed into an impromptu emergency room. Jackson and Bill worked together, stripping wet clothes from the children and wrapping them in warmed blankets. The little girl and one of the boys regained consciousness quickly, confused and frightened, until Jackson spoke to them in the same gentle tone he used with newborn calves. The woman and the other boy, Ethan, were more concerning. Bill arranged them on the couch near the fireplace, carefully monitoring their temperatures as Jackson heated water for tea and broth. "Radio's down," Bill reported grimly, returning from the study. "Lines must be down from the storm. Doc Wilson won't be making it out tonight." Jackson nodded, having expected as much. "We'll manage. I've dealt with hypothermia before." The little girl, Emily, sat at the kitchen table wrapped in one of Jackson's flannel shirts that swallowed her tiny frame. She watched him with solemn eyes as he stirred honey into a mug of warm milk. "Is my mummy going to die?" she asked suddenly, her voice small but clear. Jackson paused, then set the mug down in front of her. "No, sweetheart. Your mummy is very strong. She kept you all safe in that storm, and now we're going to help her get better." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Emily considered this, her small hands wrapping around the mug. "Daddy died. Mommy cried. For a long time after." Jackson felt as though someone had reached into his chest and squeezed. He sat down beside her, unsure what to say. "I'm sorry about your daddy," he finally managed. "That must have been really hard." Emily nodded seriously. "We had to leave our house. Mommy said we're going to live with Daddy's cousin, but I don't remember him." "Is that where you were headed? To your daddy's cousin's house?" "Uh-huh. Mommy said we have to start over." From the living room, Bill called out, "Jackson, she's waking up." Jackson gave Emily's shoulder a gentle squeeze. "Finish your milk. It'll help you get warm. Then we'll go see your mommy, okay?" By the time he reached the living room, the woman was struggling to sit up, her eyes wide with panic. "My children," she gasped, fighting against Bill's restraining hand. "Where are my babies?" "They're safe, Mum," Jackson said, stepping into her line of vision. "Two of them are right here, and the little girl is in the kitchen having some warm milk." The woman stared at him, her gaze moving from his face to Bill's, then to the unfamiliar surroundings. "Who are you? Where am I?" "Name's Jackson Reed. This is my ranch. Found you and your little ones collapsed in the snow about 3 miles from here." He gestured to the window, where snow continued to fall heavily. "Blizzard's got us all trapped for now, but you're welcome to stay until the road's clear." Some of the panic left her eyes, replaced by weariness and something else. Wariness, perhaps. "Sarah," she said after a moment. "Sarah Mitchell. Thank you for helping us." She tried to stand but swayed dangerously. Jackson moved forward, catching her elbow to steady her. "Easy now. You were halfway to freezing to death when I found you. Best take it slow." Sarah sank back onto the couch, her gaze finding her son's. Ethan remained unconscious, his small chest rising and falling steadily beneath the blankets. Will he be all right?" she asked, her voice breaking. "His temperature's coming up," Bill said reassuringly. "Kids are resilient, more so than adults, usually. Once the storm breaks, we'll get the doctor out here to check on him, but I think he'll pull through just fine." At that moment, Emily appeared in the doorway, still swamped in Jackson's shirt. "Mommy!" she cried, running across the room and throwing herself into Sarah's arms. Sarah clutched her daughter tight, tears streaming down her face. "Oh, baby, are you okay? Are you hurt?" Emily shook her head. "Mr. Jackson gave me warm milk with honey. It was yummy." Sarah looked up at Jackson over her daughter's head, her eyes filled with gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you. If you hadn't found us—" "No need for thanks," Jackson said, suddenly uncomfortable with the emotion in her gaze. "Anyone would have done the same. Not everyone would take in strangers during a blizzard." Sarah counted softly. We've met plenty who wouldn't in the last 6 months. Before Jackson could respond, Elliot trotted into the room, dragging a blanket behind him like a cape. Mommy, Mr. Jackson has horses. He said maybe I can see the barn tomorrow if the snow... Stops! Sarah laughed weakly, opening her arm to include her second son in her embrace. Did he now? That's very kind of him. But we shouldn't impose any more than we already have. It's no imposition, Jackson said, surprising himself. Storm like this, roads won't be cleared for at least a couple of days. You're welcome to stay until you can safely continue to your cousin's place. Sarah's face fell slightly. Actually, I'm not sure where we'll go. The cousin, he's my late husband's family, not mine. His letter said we could stay with him while I look for work, but when I called from our last stop, his wife told me they've decided to move to Florida. The house will be empty. She looked away, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. We don't have much money. I was hoping to find work in Pine Tree Valley, maybe rent a room somewhere until I can get back on my feet. Jackson exchanged a glance with Bill, who raised his eyebrows significantly. They both knew Pine Tree Valley was struggling. The sawmill had closed the previous year, and half the businesses on Main Street were boarded up. Jobs were scarce, especially for a single mother with 3 young children. Pine Tree doesn't have much to offer these days, Bill said gently. Not in the way of jobs. Sarah's shoulders slumped. I see. The room fell silent, except for the crackling of the fire and the soft murmurs of the children. Jackson found himself studying Sarah Mitchell, taking in the dark circles under her eyes, the determined set of her jaw, despite the defeat in her posture. She was pretty, in a worn-down sort of way, with chestnut hair and eyes the color of bourbon. But it was the protective way she held her children that struck him most, like she would fight the world itself to keep them safe. Something stirred in Jackson, an emotion he couldn't immediately identify. Later, he would recognize it as admiration, tinged with a protectiveness he hadn't felt in years. The storm will last through tomorrow at least, he said finally. Let's worry about next steps after everyone's fully recovered and the weather clears. Sarah nodded gratefully. Thank you, truly. Bill clapped his hands. Well, now that that's settled, I reckon we could all use some food. Jackson, how about I heat up some of that venison stew from yesterday? Sounds good to me, Jackson agreed. Mrs. Mitchell, are you hungry? Sarah, please, she corrected. And yes, we haven't eaten since breakfast. Whatever you have would be wonderful. As Bill disappeared into the kitchen, Jackson found himself awkwardly hovering, unsure what to do with himself. He wasn't accustomed to having guests, let alone a family with small children. Your home is lovely, Sarah said, breaking the silence. Have you lived here long? All my life, Jackson replied. It was my parents' place. They left it to me when they passed. I'm sorry for your loss, Sarah said quietly. Jackson nodded, accepting her condolences with the ease of someone who had heard them many times before. It was a while ago, almost 15 years now. Emily, who had been listening to their conversation, with interest piped up, Do you live here all alone? Emily, Sarah admonished gently, that's not polite to ask. It's all right, Jackson assured her. Yes, I live here alone, except for Bill. He stays in the foreman's cabin down by the creek. Used to be more hands around, but we've downsized over the years. Like Mommy says we had to downsize, Elliot observed, sprawled on the hearth rug. We had to leave lots of toys behind. Sarah's face tightened with what looked like embarrassment. We've had to make some adjustments since their father passed, Jackson nodded, understanding more than he let on. The ranch had been struggling for years, forcing him to sell off parcels of land and reduce his cattle herd. The harsh winters and increasing costs had taken their toll. These days, he and Bill managed the remaining herd themselves, supplementing their income by breeding and training quarter horses. Before the conversation could continue, Ethan stirred on the couch, his eyelids fluttering open. Sarah was at his side instantly, stroking his hair back from his forehead. "Hey, sweetheart," she murmured. "How are you feeling?" Ethan blinked up at her confusedly. "Mummy, where are we?" "We're at Mr. Reed's ranch. Remember we were walking in." "The snow! You got very cold, but you're safe now." Ethan considered this information, then asked seriously, "Did we find the big red mailbox?" Sarah laughed, the sound rich and warm despite the tears in her eyes. "No, baby, but we found something. Better, we found help." As if on cue, Bill returned carrying a tray laden with bowls of steaming stew and a loaf of fresh-baked bread. "Hope everyone likes venison," he announced. "Made this batch myself, so I can't promise it's as good as Jackson's mother used to make, but it'll warm you up proper." The makeshift family gathered around the fire, balancing bowls on their laps as the storm raged outside. Jackson watched as Sarah helped the triplets with their food, wiping chins and blowing on spoonfuls that were too hot. Despite everything they'd been through, there was an easy rhythm to their interactions, punctuated by whispered encouragements and occasional gentle corrections. For the first time in years, the old ranch house felt alive with the sounds of family, children's laughter, multiple conversations happening at once, the clatter of spoons against bowls. Jackson found himself wondering if this was what his parents had envisioned when they built this place, generations growing up within these walls, filling the rooms with life and love. It was a dangerous line of thinking, one that would lead nowhere but disappointment. These people were just passing through, a temporary responsibility thrust upon him by circumstance and winter weather. In a few days, they would move on to whatever future awaited them, and his life would return to its quiet, predictable routine. But as the evening wore on, and the children's eyelids grew heavy, Jackson couldn't help but notice how right Sarah looked, framed by the firelight in his mother's rocking chair, humming softly to Emily as the little girl drifted off to sleep. It was an image that would stay with him long after the snow melted and spring returned to the valley. A moment of grace in the midst of the longest winter he could remember. Morning arrived with a stillness that only follows a heavy snowfall. Jackson woke before dawn, as he had every day for the past 15 years. For a moment, the events of the previous night seemed like a dream, until he heard the unfamiliar sound of small feet pattering across the hardwood floor above his head. He dressed quickly, pulling on worn jeans and a flannel shirt before heading to the kitchen. To his surprise, Sarah was already there, her hair damp from a shower, stirring a pot of oatmeal on the stove. "Hope you don't mind," she said, offering a tentative smile. "I wanted to do something to repay your kindness." Jackson shook his head, oddly touched by the gesture. "Not at all. Coffee's usually my first order of business." Sarah pointed to the percolator bubbling on the counter. "Already taken care of. Bill showed me where everything was when he came in earlier. He's gone to check on your cattle." Jackson poured himself a cup, noting with appreciation that she'd made it strong the way he preferred. "How are the kids?" "Still sleeping, except for Ethan. He's feeling much better this morning, exploring your bookshelves upstairs. He found an old set of encyclopedias and was fascinated." Sarah's expression softened. "He's always been our bookworm." Jackson leaned against the counter, cradling his mug. "My mother taught English at the high school in town. Those encyclopedias were her pride and joy." "You must miss her," Sarah said quietly. Jackson nodded, surprised by his willingness to discuss a topic he usually avoided. "Both of them. They were good people. Dad built most of this house himself." Sarah stirred the oatmeal thoughtfully. "It's a beautiful home. They must have loved it here." "They did." Jackson cleared his throat, suddenly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "Weather report says the storm should clear by midday, but the roads will take another day or two to be passable." Sarah's shoulders tensed slightly. "We've imposed on you enough. Maybe there's a motel in town where we could—" "The Pine Haven Motel shut down 3 years ago," Jackson interrupted. Nearest accommodation would be in Riverside, 40 miles east. And like I said, roads won't be clear yet. I see. Sarah turned, her attention back to the oatmeal, but not before Jackson caught the flash of worry in her eyes. "You're welcome to stay," he found himself saying, "until you figure things out." Sarah looked up, surprise evident on her face. "That's very generous, but we couldn't possibly—" "I've got the space," Jackson shrugged. "And to be honest, Bill appreciates having someone else to cook for besides me. Says my tastes are too simple." A small smile tugged at Sarah's lips. "Simple isn't always bad." "That's what I keep telling him." Jackson set his empty mug in the sink. "Look, I need to help Bill with the morning chores. We've got new calves that need checking. Take your time with breakfast. Make yourselves at home. We can talk more when I get back." Before Sarah could respond, Jackson grabbed his coat and hat and headed for the door, suddenly needing fresh air and the simplicity of physical labor. The woman and her children were stirring emotions he'd thought long buried. Compassion, protectiveness, and something more unsettling that he couldn't quite name. Outside, the world was transformed. Snow blanketed the landscape in pristine white, the morning sun creating a dazzling display of light and shadow across the rolling hills. Jackson trudged through knee-deep drifts toward the barn, his breath clouding in the frigid air. Bill was already there, checking on a heifer that had calved the day before. He glanced up as Jackson entered, a knowing look on his weathered face. "Saw the missus was up early," he commented casually. "Makes a fine cup of coffee." "She's not the missus," Jackson corrected, perhaps too sharply. "And yes, the coffee was good," Bill chuckled, turning his attention back to the calf. "Whatever you say, boss, this little fella's doing well. Mama too. Strong pair." Jackson knelt beside the calf, running experienced hands over its small body. "Good weight on him. We got lucky with this one." They worked in companionable silence for a while, checking the other animals, distributing feed, and breaking ice in. The water troughs. It wasn't until they were mucking out stalls that Bill spoke again. "You given any thought to what happens next, with the widow and those little ones?" Jackson jabbed his pitchfork into the hay with more force than necessary. "Not my decision to make. She mentioned looking for work in Pine Tree, but we both know how that's likely to go." Bill nodded solemnly. "Not much opportunity there these days. Shame, really. Seems like a good woman just down on her luck." "Life's hard," Jackson said flatly, "especially for folks without resources." "Speaking of resources," Bill said, leaning on his pitchfork, "you still planning on hiring help for calving season? Because I was thinking—" "No," Jackson cut him off, immediately understanding where Bill was headed. "I'm not offering her charity. Who said anything about charity? We need the help. She needs the work." "Makes sense to me." Jackson frowned. "She's got 3 small children. Calving season means round-the-clock monitoring, middle-of-the-night deliveries, not to mention the physical demands. Those kids are old enough to be in school during the day, and you've got plenty of space in that big house. The east wing hasn't been used in years. You've got it all figured out, don't you?" Jackson said dryly. Bill shrugged. "Just thinking practical. Been a long time since that house had a woman's touch. And those kids, bright little things, aren't they? Remind me of you at that age, always asking questions." "Don't," Jackson warned. "Don't try to make this into something it's not." Bill held up his hands in surrender. "All I'm saying is there's no harm in offering. Worst she can do is say no." Jackson sighed, knowing Bill was right about one thing. They did need the help. The ranch had been operating with minimal staff for years, and calving season was always a strain on their resources. Still, the idea of inviting Sarah and her children to stay indefinitely made him uneasy. He'd built his life around predictability and solitude. A ready-made family would shatter that carefully constructed peace. "I'll think about it," he finally conceded, returning to his work. But as the morning progressed, Jackson found his thoughts repeatedly drifting back to the house, wondering what Sarah and the triplets were doing. Despite his reservations, he felt a pull toward them, a sense of responsibility that went beyond basic hospitality. When Jackson returned to the house around noon, he found the kitchen spotless and the living room transformed. The triplets were engaged in what appeared to be an elaborate fort-building exercise, using couch cushions and blankets to create a structure in front of the fireplace. Sarah sat cross-legged on the floor with them, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, looking younger and more relaxed than she had the night before. "Mr. Jackson!" Elliot exclaimed, spotting him in the doorway. "We built a castle. Want to see?" Jackson hesitated, then stepped into the room. "That's quite the construction project you've got going." "It's not a project, it's a kingdom," Emily corrected seriously. "I'm the queen, and Ethan and Elliot are my royal guards." "What about your mom?" Jackson asked, glancing at Sarah. "Mom's the royal storyteller," Ethan explained, emerging from behind a blanket. "She tells the best stories. She can make different voices for all the characters." Sarah laughed, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "I may have gotten carried away. Hope you don't mind us rearranging your furniture. We'll put it all back, of course." "No need," Jackson assured her. "It's nice seeing the place used." An awkward silence fell, broken only when Elliot tugged at Jackson's sleeve. "Mr. Jackson, can we see your horses now? You promised, remember?" "I believe I said, maybe," Jackson corrected gently. "But yes, the snow's stopped and the sun's out. Good time for a barn tour if your mother approves." 3 hopeful faces turned to Sarah, who smiled. "Bundle up properly. It's still cold out there." What followed was a flurry of activity as the triplets excitedly pulled on boots, coats, hats, and mittens. Jackson watched with amusement as Sarah expertly managed the process, reminding Ethan about his scarf and helping Emily with her zipper. "We'll be back in a bit," Jackson told Sarah as he prepared to lead the children outside. "Unless you want to join us." Sarah shook her head. "I thought I'd prepare lunch if that's all right. Bill mentioned you had some soup stock in the freezer." "Sure, kitchen's yours." Jackson paused, then added, "We usually eat lunch around 1. Bill should be back by then." Sarah nodded, and Jackson couldn't help but notice how she seemed to fit naturally into the rhythm of the ranch, as if she'd been there far longer than a single day. Outside, the triplets marveled at the snow-covered landscape, pointing excitedly at the distant mountains and the smoke rising from the chimney of Bill's cabin. "Is this all yours, Mr. Jackson?" Ethan asked, his eyes wide. "As far as you can see in that direction," Jackson confirmed, pointing west. "Used to be bigger, but we sold some parcels over the years." "You must be rich," Elliot exclaimed. Jackson chuckled. "Land rich, cash poor. That's how most ranchers live." "What's that mean?" Emily asked, struggling to keep up in the deep snow. Jackson scooped her up without thinking, settling her on his hip as he had seen Sarah do. "Means we own a lot of land, but we don't always have a lot of money. Everything we make goes back into the ranch, feeding the cattle, fixing fences, paying for fuel." Emily considered this thoughtfully, like how Mommy says we have to be careful with money now that Daddy's gone. Jackson nodded, something tightening in his chest. Something like that. At the barn, the children's excitement reached new heights. They were enthralled by the horses, especially Rusty, who seemed to take their attention in stride. Jackson showed them how to approach safely, letting them take turns offering carrots with flat palms. His tongue tickles. Elliot giggled as Rusty delicately accepted a treat. Jackson found himself enjoying their enthusiasm, answering their endless questions about the animals, the equipment, and ranch life. The triplets were remarkably well behaved, listening attentively to his instructions and treating the animals with gentle respect. "Mom says animals know when you're afraid, so you have to be brave, but gentle," Ethan explained, watching as Jackson demonstrated how to brush Rusty's coat. "Your mom's right about that," Jackson agreed. "Horses especially. They can sense your feelings." Like how Mommy always knows when we're sad, even when we don't say anything? Emily asked from her perch on a hay bale. Jackson smiled. Exactly like that. By the time they returned to the house, rosy-cheeked and hungry, the aroma of homemade soup filled the air. Bill was already at the kitchen table, regaling Sarah with stories of Jackson's childhood misadventures. Caught him trying to lasso the neighbor's goat from the back of his pony, Bill was saying as they entered. Couldn't have been more than 7 years old. Don't believe everything Bill tells you, Jackson warned, helping the triplets out. Of their snow gear, Sarah laughed, ladling soup into bowls. I don't know. Sounds just like something a ranch boy would do. The meal was livelier than any Jackson could remember having in this house for years. The triplets chattered excitedly about their barn adventure, each trying to outdo the others with their observations. Bill contributed outrageous tall tales about mountain life that had the children wide-eyed with wonder, while Sarah occasionally caught Jackson's eye with a look that said she wasn't fooled for a minute by the old foreman's exaggerations. After lunch, when the children had been settled in front of the fire with some old board games Bill had unearthed from a closet, Jackson found himself alone with Sarah in the kitchen. "Thank you," she said simply, as they worked side by side washing dishes. "For everything. The tour meant the world to them. They haven't had much chance for adventure lately." Jackson nodded, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "They're good kids. Well behaved." "I try," Sarah said, a hint of pride in her voice. "It hasn't been easy, especially since Michael died, but they're resilient." "How did it happen?" Jackson asked before he could stop himself. "If you don't mind my asking." Sarah was quiet for a moment, focusing on the plate in her hands. Black ice. He was driving home from work. He was an accountant, worked late during tax season. The police said he probably never saw the truck that hit him. "I'm sorry," Jackson said, the words feeling inadequate. Sarah nodded. "The insurance barely covered the funeral. We had some savings, but medical bills ate through those quickly. Then the rent increased and—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "I'm sorry. You didn't ask for my life story." "It's all right," Jackson said softly. "Life can change in an instant. I know something about that." Their eyes met, and Jackson felt an unexpected connection, a recognition of shared experience despite their different circumstances. For a brief moment, the carefully constructed walls he'd built around himself seemed to waver. "Sarah," he began, then hesitated, unsure if what he was about to offer was generosity or selfishness. "I was thinking—" A crash from the living room interrupted them, followed by Elliot's dismayed cry. Sarah was moving before Jackson could react, hurrying toward the sound. He followed to find that one of his mother's old vases had been knocked from a side table, shattering on the hardwood floor. "I'm sorry, Mr. Jackson," Elliot wailed, tears streaming down his face. "We were playing hide-and-seek and I bumped into it." Sarah was already kneeling beside him, checking for cuts while Emily and Ethan watched with wide, frightened eyes. You hurt?" Jackson asked, crouching beside them. Elliot shook his head, still sobbing. "But I broke your special vase." "Hey, it's okay," Jackson said gently. "It was just an old vase. The important thing is that you're not hurt." Sarah looked up at him gratefully. "I'm so sorry about this. We'll replace it, of course." Jackson shook his head. "No need. Honestly, it's been gathering dust for years. Probably should have packed it away long ago." As they worked together to clean up the mess, careful to keep the children away from the sharp fragments, Jackson found himself reflecting on how quickly he'd dismissed the loss of the vase. In the past, he'd zealously preserved everything his parents had left behind, as if maintaining the house exactly as they'd left it could somehow keep their memory alive. But faced with Elliot's distress, the vase had suddenly seemed unimportant, just an object, not a sacred relic. After the children had been calmed and the floor cleared of glass, Jackson retreated to his study, needing space to think through. The window, He could see fresh snow beginning to fall again, adding to the already substantial accumulation. The forecast had mentioned a second wave moving in. They could be snowed in for several more days. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Sarah stood in the doorway, hesitant to enter. "I just wanted to check if you needed anything," she said. "The children are down for naps. They were exhausted after all the excitement." "Come in," Jackson invited, gesturing to a chair opposite his desk. "I was actually hoping to talk to you." Sarah entered, perching on the edge of the chair as if prepared to flee at a moment's notice. "Is something wrong?" "Not at all," Jackson assured her. "Quite the opposite, actually. I have a proposition for you." Sarah's expression turned guarded. "What kind of proposition?" "A job," Jackson said simply. "Here on the ranch. We need help for the calving season. It starts in about 2 weeks and runs through spring. Usually we hire extra hands, but we've been short-staffed the past few years." Sarah's brow furrowed. "I don't know the first thing about ranching. You're a quick learner from what I've seen. And there's the added benefit of housing. The east wing of the house has several bedrooms, its own bathroom. Been closed up for years, but it wouldn't take much to make it livable." "Why would you do this?" Sarah asked, genuinely puzzled. "You don't know us." Jackson considered his answer carefully. "The ranch needs help, and you need work. Seems like a mutually beneficial arrangement." And the triplets. They'd be in school during the day, bus stops at the end of the drive. Afternoons and evenings they'd be here. It's a safe place for kids. I grew up here, remember. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her fingers twisting in her lap. "I don't want charity," she finally said, echoing Jackson's earlier words to Bill. "It's not charity," Jackson insisted. "It's a job. I'm offering fair wages for honest work, and a place to stay is standard for ranch hands, especially during calving season when we need people on call day and night." "What exactly would this job entail?" Jackson leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "Helping with the calves, monitoring the pregnant heifers, assisting with difficult births, bottle-feeding orphans if necessary, general ranch work too, feeding, cleaning stalls. It's not easy work, I won't lie, but it's meaningful." "And if it doesn't work out," Sarah asked, "if I'm not cut out for it, then we part ways, no hard feelings. I help you find something else in town, or in Riverside if necessary." Sarah studied him, as if trying to discern his true motives. Jackson met her gaze steadily, hoping she could see the sincerity behind his offer. He wasn't entirely sure himself why he felt so compelled to help this woman and her children, but something told him it was the right thing to do. "I'd need to think about it," Sarah finally said. "Talk to the kids." Jackson nodded. "Of course, take your time." As Sarah rose to leave, she paused at the door. "Why did you really stop ranching the full property? You mentioned selling parcels." The question caught Jackson off guard. "How did you know there was more to that story?" A small smile played at Sarah's lips. "You get a certain look when you're not telling the whole truth." Your left eyebrow twitches. Jackson laughed despite himself. "That obvious, huh?" "Only to someone who spent a lot of time reading people," Sarah said. "So, the real reason?" Jackson sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Drought hit hard about 8 years ago. Banks weren't willing to extend more credit, had to sell land to keep the core operation running. Pride's a hard thing to swallow sometimes." Sarah nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Thank you for telling me, and for the offer. I promise I'll consider it carefully." After she left, Jackson remained at his desk, watching the snow fall outside his window. He wasn't sure what answer he was hoping for from Sarah. The rational part of him recognized that bringing a widow and 3 young children into his carefully ordered life would inevitably bring complications and challenges. Yet another part, a part he'd thought long dormant, felt a flicker of something that might have been hope. Whatever her decision, Jackson realized with sudden clarity his life had already changed the moment he spotted that dark shape in the snow. The question now was whether he would embrace that change or retreat back into the solitude that had defined his existence for so long. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the land in a blank white canvas, as if nature itself were offering a fresh start. 2 weeks had passed since Jackson found Sarah and the triplets in the snow. The second storm had indeed kept them snowbound for several more days, during which Sarah had made her decision. She accepted Jackson's job offer with one condition, a 3-month trial period, after which either party could walk away without hard feelings. The east wing of the ranch house, closed off for nearly a decade, had been opened and aired out. Jackson and Bill had spent 2 days cleaning, fixing minor issues, and making the space livable. Sarah had been overwhelmed by the generosity. The wing contained 3 bedrooms, a small sitting room, and a bathroom with a clawfoot tub that delighted the triplets. "It's like having our own apartment, but better," she'd said when Jackson showed her the finished space. Now, on a crisp February morning, Sarah stood on the porch watching the school bus disappear down the long driveway, carrying the triplets to their first day at Pine Tree Valley Elementary. The enrollment process had been surprisingly smooth, thanks to Bill's sister Marge, who worked as the school secretary and had expedited the paperwork. Sarah hugged herself against the cold, a mixture of emotions swirling within her. Pride at how bravely her children had boarded the bus, anxiety about how they would adjust to their new school, and an unexpected sense of freedom. The first time in years she'd been truly alone, without the constant responsibility of caring for 3 small people. "They'll be fine," came Jackson's voice from behind her. Sarah turned to find him leaning against the doorframe, 2 steaming mugs in his hands. He offered one to her, and she accepted gratefully, wrapping her cold fingers around the warm ceramic. "No," she sighed. "They're resilient. Just feels strange not having them underfoot." Jackson nodded. "First day's the hardest from what I remember of my mom's teaching days. Kids usually adjust faster than parents." Sarah smiled, taking a sip of the coffee. "When does my official ranch hand training begin?" "No time like the present," Jackson replied. "Bill's already in the barn. One of the heifers looks close to calving. Good opportunity for a hands-on lesson." Sarah followed Jackson across the yard, the snow crunching beneath their boots. The cold air was crisp and clean, the sky a brilliant blue. In the 2 weeks they'd been at the ranch, Sarah had started to appreciate the vast openness of the landscape, so different from the crowded Seattle neighborhood they'd left behind. In the barn, Bill was monitoring a young heifer, his weathered face creased with concentration. He glanced up as they entered, offering a nod of greeting. "Perfect timing," he said. "Looks like we'll have a new arrival before noon." For the next several hours, Sarah received a crash course in bovine obstetrics. Jackson and Bill were patient teachers, explaining each step of the process and answering her many questions. When the heifer finally delivered a healthy bull calf, Sarah found herself blinking back tears of wonder. "That was," she breathed, watching as the mother began to lick her newborn clean. "Something, isn't it?" Bill chuckled. "Seen it thousands of times, never gets old." Jackson handed Sarah a clean towel. "Want to help dry him off? Gets the circulation going, helps him warm up faster." Sarah accepted the towel, kneeling beside the calf. Its large brown eyes regarded her with innocent curiosity as she gently wiped the dampness from its coat. The connection was immediate and powerful. This new life, so perfect and vulnerable, depending on human care to survive. "Does he have a name?" she asked. Jackson and Bill exchanged amused glances. "We don't typically name the calves destined for market," Jackson explained gently. "Just the breeding stock." "Oh," Sarah said, understanding dawning. "Of course, that makes sense." Bill cleared his throat. "Though I suppose this one could be special, being the first calf of the season and all. Maybe call him First Light, on account of when he was born." Jackson raised an eyebrow at his foreman, but didn't contradict him. "First light it is, then," Sarah smiled, continuing to rub the calf's coat. "The kids will love him." "Speaking of which," Bill said, checking his watch, "bus will be back in about 2 hours. Plenty of time for you to learn how to muck stalls." Sarah laughed, handing the towel back to Jackson. "I can't wait." By the time the school bus returned, Sarah was exhausted but exhilarated. Ranch work was physically demanding in ways she hadn't anticipated, using muscles long dormant from her previous office jobs. Yet there was something deeply satisfying about the tangible results of her labor: clean stalls, fed animals, a newborn calf thriving under their care. The triplets burst into the kitchen, their excitement palpable as they talked over one another, eager to share every detail of their day. Emily had made a friend named Lily, who shared her love of horses. Ethan's teacher, Mrs. Collins, had a classroom library bigger than any he'd ever seen. Elliot had impressed everyone at recess with his knowledge of ranch animals, courtesy of his time with Jackson. "And guess what?" Emily said, bouncing on her toes. "Our class is going to hatch baby chicks. Mrs. Roberts says we can watch them grow from eggs." "That's wonderful, sweetie," Sarah said, helping them hang up their coats and backpacks. "Can we have chickens, Mr. Jackson?" Elliot asked, turning his hopeful gaze to the rancher who had entered behind Sarah. "We used to have a chicken coop," Jackson admitted. "Haven't used it in years, though. Would need some fixing up." "I could help," Elliot volunteered eagerly. "I'm really good at fixing things. Daddy taught me how to use a hammer." A shadow crossed Sarah's face at the mention of Michael, but she quickly masked it with a smile. "Why don't you all wash up for snack time, then homework before dinner?" As the children raced upstairs, Sarah began preparing apple slices and peanut butter, aware of Jackson still standing in the doorway, watching her. "What?" she asked, feeling self-conscious under his steady gaze. "Nothing," he said, shaking his head slightly. "Just thinking about how quickly they've adapted. Kids are amazing that way." Sarah nodded, arranging the apple slices on a plate. "They've been through a lot of changes in the past 6 months. I worried it might be too much, but they seem to be thriving here." "And you?" Jackson asked quietly. "Are you thriving too?" The question caught Sarah off guard. She paused, knife hovering over an apple. "I think I'm getting there. Today felt good, productive. It's been a while since I felt useful beyond just being mom." Jackson nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Well, for what it's worth, Bill thinks you're a natural. Said you've got good instincts with the animals." Sarah felt a flush of pride at the compliment. High praise coming from Bill. "Highest," Jackson agreed. "Man's been working cattle since before I was born. Doesn't impress easily." The sound of small feet thundering down the stairs signaled the return of the triplets. Jackson straightened, clearing his throat. "I should get back to work. See you at dinner." As he turned to leave, Sarah called after him. "Jackson, thank you for everything." He nodded once, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth before heading back out, into the fading afternoon light. The days fell into a rhythm as February gave way to March. Mornings began early, with Sarah helping prepare breakfast before the children caught the school bus. Then came ranch work, feeding animals, checking pregnant heifers, assisting with births, and learning the countless skills needed to keep the operation running smoothly. Afternoons were devoted to the triplets, helping with homework, listening to their adventures at school, and making sure they had time to play before dinner. Evenings often found them all gathered in the living room, the children playing games or reading, while the adults discussed the day's events and planned for tomorrow. To Sarah's surprise, Jackson began joining them more frequently in the evenings, rather than retreating to his study as he had in the beginning. He taught the children to play chess, shared stories of his own childhood on the ranch, and occasionally even read aloud from the same books his mother had once read to him. One evening, in late March, after the children had been tucked into bed, Sarah found Jackson on the front porch, gazing up at the star-filled sky. She joined him, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders against the lingering winter chill. "Penny, for your thoughts?" she asked, leaning against the railing beside him. Jackson smiled faintly. "Just thinking about cycles, I guess. Seasons, changes, feeling. Philosophical tonight? Maybe. Spring's always been a time of reflection for me. New life everywhere you look." He gestured toward the barn, where 3 new calves had been born that week. "Makes a man consider where he's been and where he's going." Sarah studied his profile in the moonlight. In the 2 months she'd known him, Jackson had rarely spoken about his personal feelings or aspirations. He was a man of action rather than words, expressing himself through deeds rather than conversation. "And where are you going, Jackson Reed?" she asked softly. He turned to face her, his expression thoughtful. "Not sure anymore. For a long time, it was just about survival. Keeping the ranch afloat, honoring my parents' legacy. Didn't think much beyond that. And now?" Jackson shrugged, looking slightly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "Now things are different." Sarah waited, sensing there was more he wanted to say. When he remained silent, she changed tack. "The children adore you, you know, especially Elliot. He follows you around like a shadow whenever you let him." Jackson's expression softened. "He's a good kid. All of them are." "You've done an amazing job, Sarah, especially considering everything you've been through." "We've been lucky," Sarah said simply. "To have found you, I mean. I don't know what would have happened if—" "Don't," Jackson interrupted gently. "No use dwelling on might-have-beens." They stood in companionable silence for a while, watching as clouds drifted across the moon, casting shifting shadows over the landscape. "Our 3-month trial is halfway over," Sarah finally said, voicing the thought that had been increasingly on her mind. "We should probably talk about what happens next." Jackson tensed slightly beside her. "You thinking of leaving?" "No," Sarah said quickly. "Not unless— Are you wanting us to go?" "No," Jackson replied, equally rapid. "Not at all. You've been—" He paused, as if searching for the right words. "You've been good for the ranch. The calving season's going smoother than it has in years." "Just good for the ranch?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jackson turned to her then, vulnerability evident in his expression. "No, not just for the ranch." Their eyes met, and Sarah felt something shift between them, an acknowledgement of the connection that had been growing steadily since that first night. For a breathless moment, she thought he might reach for her, but instead, Jackson took a small step back. "It's getting late," he said, his voice rough. "Early start tomorrow." Sarah nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. "Good night, Jackson." As she turned to go inside, his voice stopped her. "Sarah, I'd like it if you and the kids stayed. Beyond the 3 months, I mean." Sarah looked back at him, a smile spreading across her face. "We'd like that too." April brought warmer weather and longer days. The ranch burst into life, with wildflowers carpeting the pastures and new calves frolicking on spindly legs. The triplets, now firmly settled into school and ranch life, begged daily to ride the gentle mare Jackson had been training for them. True to his word, Jackson had helped Elliot repair the old chicken coop, and 6 hens now pecked contentedly in their enclosure, providing fresh eggs each morning. Emily had adopted an orphaned lamb that needed bottle feeding, naming it Snowbell and insisting on doing all the care herself. Ethan had discovered Jackson's collection of Louis L'Amour westerns and was steadily working his way through them, often reading aloud to Jackson in the evenings. For Sarah, the transformation was equally profound. The physical labor had strengthened her body, giving her a confidence she hadn't felt in years. She'd mastered many of the basic ranch skills Bill and Jackson had taught her, and found unexpected joy in working with the animals. The constant weight of anxiety that had been her companion since Michael's death had gradually lifted, replaced by a cautious optimism about the future. And then there was Jackson. Their relationship had evolved from reluctant host and desperate guest to employer and employee to friends and something hovering on the edge of more. They worked well together, anticipating each other's needs and communicating often without words. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch after the children were asleep, talking about everything and nothing, the day's events, plans for the ranch, memories of their respective childhoods. Yet despite the obvious attraction between them, Jackson maintained a careful distance, never crossing the invisible line he seemed to have drawn. Sarah respected his restraint, recognizing that he was a man who moved at his own pace, particularly when it came to matters of the heart. One Saturday in mid-April, Jackson suggested a picnic to celebrate the end of calving season. The day dawned, clear and warm, perfect for an outing to the small lake on the western edge of the property. Bill declined to join them, claiming a mysterious appointment in town, though his wink to Sarah suggested his absence was more strategic than necessary. They packed the old pickup truck with blankets, food, fishing gear, and 3 excited children. The ride to the lake was filled with song and laughter, with Emily leading them in rounds of "She'll Be Coming Round the Mountain" and "Old MacDonald Had a Farm." The lake was a revelation to Sarah, a perfect oval of clear blue water surrounded by pine trees, with a small sandy beach on one side and grassy banks on the other. A wooden dock extended into the deeper water, weathered but solid. "It's beautiful," she breathed, as Jackson helped her down from the truck. "I had no idea this was here." "My father built that dock the summer I turned 10, Jackson said, unloading. "Their supplies. Used to spend every free moment fishing when I was a kid." The children were already racing toward the water, their excited shouts echoing across the peaceful setting. "Not too close until we get there," Sarah called after them. They spent the morning fishing, with Jackson patiently teaching the triplets how to bait hooks and cast lines. Ethan proved to have a natural talent for it, catching 3 small trout that Jackson showed him how to clean. For their lunch, Sarah prepared a campfire, and they cooked the fish along with potatoes and corn they'd brought from home. After lunch, full and content, they sprawled on blankets in the dappled shade of a large pine tree. The children, energetic as always, began exploring the shoreline for interesting rocks and feathers, staying within sight but giving the adults a rare moment alone. "I used to come here to think," Jackson said, propped on one elbow beside Sarah. "After my parents died. Something about the water, always the same but always changing." Sarah turned to face him. "You don't talk about them much. Your parents." Jackson plucked a blade of grass, twisting it between his fingers. "It's been a long time. They were good people, hard workers. My father taught me everything I know about ranching. My mother made sure I knew there was a world beyond these hills, books, ideas, dreams." "They sound wonderful," Sarah said softly. "They'd be proud of you, Jackson, of what you've done with the ranch, especially these past few years when things have been difficult." Jackson was quiet for a moment. "Maybe my father was always forward-thinking, willing to take risks to grow the operation. I've been more cautious. Sometimes I wonder if I've been too focused on holding on to the past, instead of building something new." "It's hard to let go," Sarah said, "of memories of people we've lost. I still find myself reaching for the phone to call Michael when something funny happens with the kids. Then I remember he's not there to answer." "Does it get easier?" Jackson asked, his voice low. "Not easier exactly, different. The sharp edges soften with time." Sarah sat up, drawing her knees to her chest. "Having the children helped. They needed me to be strong, to keep going. Without them, I might have just fallen apart after Michael died." "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for," Jackson said, sitting up beside her. "Driving cross-country with 3 small children, starting over in a new place, that takes courage." "Or desperation," Sarah countered with a wry smile. Sometimes they're the same thing. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the distant laughter of the children and the gentle lapping of water against the shore. "I'm glad we found you," Sarah finally said, looking out over the lake rather than at Jackson. "Or that you found us, I should say. I think maybe we found each other," Jackson replied quietly. Sarah turned to him then, struck by the openness in his expression. Gone was the careful reserve he usually maintained, replaced by something warm and vulnerable. "Jackson," she began, not entirely sure what she wanted to say. Before she could continue, Emily's voice rang out from the shoreline. "Mum! Mr. Jackson! Look what we found!" The moment broken, they both turned to see the triplets running toward them, hands cupped around something they were carrying. "A baby bird," Elliot announced as they reached the blanket. It fell out of its nest. In his small hands was a tiny, featherless bird, its eyes still closed, beak opening and closing in silent plea. "Oh, little ones," Sarah said gently. "That's a baby robin. We need to try to put it back in its nest." "Can we keep it?" Emily asked hopefully. "I could take care of it, like Snowbell." Jackson knelt beside them, carefully examining the bird. "Wild things belong in the wild with their families," he explained, "but we can help it get back home. Let's see if we can find where it came from." He led the children back toward where they'd found the bird, scanning the trees above. Sarah followed, watching as Jackson lifted Ethan onto his shoulders to peer into a nest hidden among the branches. With careful movements, Ethan placed the baby bird back among its siblings. "There," Jackson said as he lowered Ethan to the ground. "Its mother will come back now that we're gone. How do you know she won't reject it because we touched it?" Ethan asked, his brow furrowed with concern. "That's just an old wives' tale," Jackson assured him. "Birds can't smell very well. The mother will accept the baby back without any problem." "Like how you accepted us?" Emily asked innocently. Jackson glanced. At Sarah, a smile tugging at his lips. "Something like that, I suppose." As they packed up their picnic late that afternoon, Sarah felt a sense of contentment she hadn't experienced in years. The day had been perfect. Sunshine, laughter, the simple joy of being together. Watching Jackson with her children, patient and kind in his guidance, she realized how seamlessly he had integrated into their lives. And perhaps more surprisingly, how she and the triplets had found a place within his. The 3-month trial period was nearly over, yet neither of them had mentioned it again since that night on the porch. Perhaps, Sarah thought as they loaded the truck for the journey home, some agreements didn't need formal renewal. Some connections, once formed, simply continued to grow stronger with each passing day. May arrived with unexpected force, bringing thunderstorms that rattled windows and turned the ranch's dirt roads into muddy rivers. On one particularly violent evening, Sarah stood at the kitchen window, watching lightning split the darkened sky as she dried the dinner dishes. "Will the animals be okay?" Emily asked, pressed against her side. "They'll be fine, sweetheart," Sarah assured her. "The barn is sturdy, and they're all tucked safely inside." The back door burst open, admitting Jackson and a gust of wind that sent napkins flying from the counter. He was soaked through, hat dripping onto the floor as he removed it. "Everything secure?" Sarah asked, handing him a towel. Jackson nodded, running the towel over his face and hair. "Bill's staying in the barn tonight. We've got a mare ready to foal. Doesn't want to leave her." "Can I go help?" Elliot asked eagerly, looking up from the card game he and Ethan were playing at the table. "Not tonight, partner," Jackson said, ruffling the boy's hair. "But if we have a new foal by morning, you'll be the first to see it." Another crack of thunder shook the house, causing Emily to bury her face against Sarah's side. Jackson knelt down to the little girl's level. "Hey, Miss Emily, you know what my mom used to tell me about thunder?" Emily peeked at him with one eye. "What?" She said it was just the sky moving furniture around, making room for more stars. A small smile tugged at Emily's lips. Really? Cross my heart, Jackson said solemnly. And you know what? I've got some ice cream hidden in the freezer. Seems like a perfect night for a thunder party. What's a thunder party? Ethan asked, abandoning his cards and joining them. Well, you get blankets and pillows and make a fort in the living room, Jackson explained. Then you eat ice cream and tell stories until the storm passes. The children's faces lit up, their fear forgotten in the excitement of this new adventure. Sarah caught Jackson's eye over their heads, mouthing a silent thank you as the triplets raced off to gather supplies. Later, as they sat in a makeshift blanket fort illuminated by flashlights, Sarah watched Jackson weave tales of ranch adventures that had the children alternately wide-eyed and giggling. This side of him, playful, gentle, imaginative, had emerged gradually over the months they'd lived at the ranch. It was a far cry from the reserved, almost stern man who had first welcomed them into his home. When the children finally dozed off, surrounded by pillows and stuffed animals, Sarah and Jackson carefully extracted themselves from the fort and moved to the kitchen. "Coffee?" Sarah offered, keeping her voice low. Jackson nodded, leaning against the counter as she prepared. 2 mugs. The way they look at storms now versus 3 months ago, night and day difference. You've helped them feel safe, Sarah said, handing him a steaming mug. Secure, that's no small thing. Kids are resilient when they have stability, Jackson replied. You've given them that, even through all the changes. Sarah sipped her coffee, considering his words. We all have, I think. You, me, Bill. It's becoming a real village around here. A comfortable silence settled between them, punctuated by the diminishing rumbles of thunder and the soft patter of rain against the windows. You know, Jackson said eventually, I've been meaning to discuss something with you. Sarah looked up, noting the sudden seriousness in his tone. Oh? The summer semester at Pine Tree Community College starts next month. They're offering evening classes. Business management, accounting, things like that. He set his mug down, eyes meeting hers. Thought you might be interested. With your background in office work, could be a good way to build on those skills. Sarah stared at him, surprised. I hadn't even thought about that. You mentioned once that you'd always wanted to finish your degree, Jackson continued, before the triplets came along. You remembered that? Sarah asked softly, touched that he'd recalled a detail from one of their many conversations. Jackson nodded. Looked into it. They've got scholarships for single parents, flexible schedules. Bill and I could manage things. Here on the evenings you'd have classes. Jackson, I don't know what to say, Sarah murmured, overwhelmed by his thoughtfulness. Say you'll think about it, he suggested. Education's never wasted, and the ranch will always be here, but having options. That's important. Sarah studied him, trying to understand the message behind his words. Are you worried I'll leave? Is that what this is about? Jackson shook his head. No, just want you to have choices. Make decisions based on what you want, not just what's available. And what if what I want is right here? Sarah asked quietly. Their eyes met, the question hanging between them. Before Jackson could respond, a particularly loud clap of thunder shook the house, followed by startled cries from the living room. They both moved immediately to comfort the children, the moment slipping away like rainwater down a window pane. The next morning dawned bright and clear, the storm having washed the world clean. True to his word, Jackson took Elliot to the barn. Before breakfast to see the new foal, a spindly-legged filly with a white star on her forehead. Can we name her? Elliot asked, watching in awe as the wobbly newborn nursed from her mother. What did you have in mind? Jackson asked, crouching. Beside him, Elliot thought for a moment, his face screwed up in concentration. Thunderstar, he declared, because she was born in the storm and has that star right there. Jackson nodded approvingly. Thunderstar it is. Good name, strong. She'll be a fine horse someday. When they returned to the house, Elliot couldn't contain his excitement, giving his siblings a blow-by-blow account of the foal's first steps while Sarah prepared pancakes. The kitchen buzzed with energy and chatter, a far cry from the silent breakfasts Jackson had eaten alone for so many years. After dropping the triplets at school, Sarah and Jackson drove into Pine Tree Valley to pick up supplies. The small town had seemed bleak and unwelcoming when Sarah first arrived, but now she recognized faces on the sidewalks, received friendly waves from shopkeepers. Somehow, without her noticing, she had become part of the community. At the feed store, the owner, Jim Barnes, greeted them warmly. "Morning, Jackson, Sarah. Heard you folks had a new arrival last night." "News travels fast," Jackson commented dryly. Jim chuckled. "Bill stopped in for coffee on his way home. Said Elliot named her Thunderstar." "That boy has a way with names," Sarah said proudly. "Remember what he called the rooster?" "Sir crows a lot," Jackson replied with a grin. "Hard to forget." As they loaded bags of feed into the truck, Jim leaned against the doorframe. "Say, you two coming to the Founders' Day? Celebration next weekend? Town's going all out this year. Parade, barbecue, dance at the community center." Sarah glanced at Jackson, who shrugged. "Hadn't thought about it," he admitted. "Should bring those kids of yours," Jim continued. "My Darlene's organizing games. For the little ones, prizes and everything." "Sounds like fun," Sarah said. "We'll have to check our schedule." Back in the truck, Sarah noticed Jackson's pensive expression. "Not a fan of town celebrations?" she asked lightly. "Haven't been to one in years," he confessed. "Not much for crowds these days." "The triplets would love it," Sarah said carefully. "But we don't have to go if you'd rather not." Jackson was quiet for a moment, then sighed. "No, we should go. Good for the kids to experience local traditions. And it might be nice. Different, but nice." Sarah smiled, squeezing his arm briefly. Different can be good. The week passed in a blur of activity. Spring brought its own rhythms to the ranch, fence mending, garden planting, preparing for summer grazing. Sarah found herself increasingly capable, tackling tasks that would have intimidated her months ago with growing confidence. The triplets flourished as well. School ended for the year, and they threw themselves into ranch life with boundless energy. Ethan surprised everyone by revealing a talent for mechanical work, spending hours with Bill learning to maintain the tractors and trucks. Emily's bond with her lamb, Snowbell, had expanded to include most of the smaller animals on the ranch. And Elliot shadowed Jackson constantly, absorbing ranching knowledge like a sponge. The morning of Founders' Day dawned bright and clear. Sarah helped the children dress in their best clothes. Not formal, but clean and presentable. She found herself taking extra care with her own appearance, selecting a floral sundress she hadn't worn since before Michael died, and even applying a touch of makeup. When Jackson emerged from his room in a crisp western shirt and his good boots, Sarah felt her breath catch. He'd trimmed his beard and combed his hair neatly, transforming from rugged rancher to handsome escort in a way that made her heart skip. "You look nice," he said, his eyes lingering on her face before quickly moving away. "So do you," Sarah replied, smoothing her dress nervously. "Very distinguished." "Mom looks like a princess," Emily declared, twirling around them in her own dress. "Indeed she does," Bill agreed, appearing in the doorway. He was also dressed for town, his silver hair slicked back and his usual work clothes replaced by pressed slacks and a bolo tie. The drive to town was filled with excited chatter from the back seat. The triplets had never experienced a small-town celebration, and their anticipation was contagious. By the time they parked on Main Street, even Jackson seemed caught up in the festive atmosphere. Pine Tree Valley had transformed itself for the occasion. Flags and bunting adorned the storefronts, a band played in the gazebo at the town square, and the streets were filled with families enjoying the perfect spring day. Sarah held Emily's hand as they navigated the crowd, while Ethan and Elliot flanked Jackson, occasionally reaching for his hands when the throng grew thick. They watched the parade, a charming procession of vintage tractors, local school groups, and the town's ancient fire truck, then explored the various booths and activities set up in the park. The children won prizes at the ring toss, devoured cotton candy with gleeful abandon, and insisted on riding the small carousel twice. Throughout the day, Sarah noticed how many people greeted Jackson, often with surprise at seeing him at the event. He responded politely, if somewhat stiffly, but gradually seemed to relax as the day wore on, even laughing openly when Bill got dunked at the charity dunking booth. As afternoon faded into evening, the celebration moved to the community center for the traditional dinner and dance. Long tables had been set up, laden with potluck dishes contributed by town residents. Sarah had baked her mother's famous apple pies for the occasion, and felt a surge of pride when they were placed prominently on the dessert table. After eating their fill, the triplets joined a group of children playing tag outside, supervised by some of the older kids. Bill found a table with several contemporaries, clearly settling in for an evening of reminiscing and tall tales. "Want to take a walk?" Jackson asked, nodding toward the open doors that led to a small garden behind the community center. Sarah nodded, suddenly nervous, as they stepped outside into the soft evening air. The garden was strung with fairy lights that glowed softly in the gathering dusk, casting a magical ambience over the flower beds and wooden benches. "Having a good time?" Sarah asked, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Better than I expected," Jackson admitted. "Been a while since I've been to one of these. Forgot how much I used to enjoy them." "The triplets are having the time of their lives," Sarah said, smiling at the distant sound of children's laughter. "Elliot's already asking if we can come back next year." Jackson was quiet for a moment, then gestured to a bench. "Mind if we sit for a bit?" They settled side by side, close but not touching. From inside, the sounds of the band starting up drifted through the open doors, a slow, sweet melody that carried on the evening breeze. "Sarah," Jackson began, then stopped, seeming to gather his thoughts. "These past few months, they've been different than anything I expected." "For me too," Sarah said softly. "When I offered you that job, I thought I was just helping someone in need. Didn't realize how much you and the kids would change things around here." "Change me?" Sarah's heart beat faster at the earnestness in his voice. "Is that a good thing? Or a bad thing?" "Good," Jackson said firmly. "Definitely good. The ranch hasn't felt this alive in years, maybe ever." He turned slightly to face her more directly. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said the other night. About what you want being right here." Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "I need you to know," Jackson continued carefully, "that whatever happens between us, your place at the ranch is secure, yours and the kids. That's not conditional on anything else." "I know that," Sarah assured him. "I've never doubted your integrity, Jackson." "Good," he nodded, "because I've been wanting to ask you something, but I needed you to understand that first." Sarah held her breath as Jackson took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "Would you consider staying? Not just as an employee or a tenant, but as more. Building something permanent here, together." "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" Sarah whispered, her heart in her throat. Jackson smiled, the vulnerability in his eyes making him look younger, almost boyish. "I'm not very good at this. Been out of practice for a long time. But yes, I'm asking if you might someday consider becoming more than just a ranch hand. If you might consider becoming my wife." Tears sprang to Sarah's eyes, unexpected but not unwelcome. "Jackson Reed, are you proposing to me?" "Not exactly," he clarified. "Not yet. That would be rushing things, and if I've learned anything from ranching, it's that the best things take time to grow properly." He squeezed her hand gently. But I am asking if that's a direction you might be open to, down the road. If it's something worth exploring. Sarah looked into his earnest face, this man who had saved her family from the snow and opened not just his home, but his heart to them. The answer was simple, had perhaps been inevitable since that first night by the fire. Yes, she said, her voice clear despite the tears. I would definitely be open to exploring that. The relief and joy that spread across Jackson's face made him look 10 years younger. With a gentleness that belied his strength, he raised a hand to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear. "May I kiss you, Sarah Mitchell?" he asked, his voice a low rumble that sent shivers down her spine. In answer, Sarah leaned forward, closing the distance between them. Their lips met softly at first, then with growing confidence, a first kiss that felt like both a beginning and a homecoming. When they finally drew apart, Jackson rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if savoring the moment. "Been wanting to do that for a while now," he confessed. Sarah laughed softly. "What took you so long, cowboy?" "Had to be sure," Jackson replied, opening his eyes to meet her gaze. "For both our sakes, you've been through so much, and the triplets adore you," Sarah assured him. "You know that." "Feeling mutual," Jackson said. "Never thought I'd want kids of my own, but those three, they've got a way of working themselves into your heart." From inside, the music changed to a more lively tune. Jackson stood, holding out his hand to Sarah. "Dance with me?" Sarah took his hand, allowing him to lead her back inside to the dance floor. They joined the other couples, moving to the music, Jackson's hand warm and steady at her waist. As they danced, Sarah caught glimpses of their extended family, Bill clapping along from his table, the triplets racing in from outside to watch. In delighted surprise as their mother and Jackson twirled across the floor. Later that night, as they drove home under a canopy of stars, the triplets slumbered in the back seat, exhausted from their day of adventure. Sarah reached across the center console, taking Jackson's hand in hers. He interlaced their fingers without hesitation, a simple gesture that felt profoundly right. "I never expected this," Sarah said quietly, gazing out at the silhouettes of the mountains against the night sky. "When Michael died, I thought that was it for me, that I'd spend the rest of my life alone, focusing on the children." Jackson squeezed her hand. "Life has a way of surprising you. Sometimes in the best possible ways," Sarah agreed, thinking of how a desperate trek through a snowstorm had led them to this moment. To a man who had built not just a fire to warm them on that first night, but a foundation for a new future. None of them could have imagined. The ranch came into view, its windows glowing warmly in welcome. No longer just a shelter from the storm, but a home in the truest sense of the word. As Jackson parked the truck, Sarah leaned over to kiss him softly, a promise of many such moments to come. "Welcome home," she whispered against his lips. Jackson smiled, his eyes reflecting all the love and hope she felt in her own heart. "Welcome home," he echoed. And in those two simple words was a universe of meaning, acknowledgement of the past they'd both survived, appreciation of the present they'd built together, and anticipation of the future stretching before them as vast and filled with possibility as the Montana sky above. The Montana summer arrived in earnest, bringing long, sun-drenched days that stretched from dawn until well past 9 in the evening. The ranch bloomed with activity. Pastures rich with grass for grazing cattle, the garden bursting with vegetables, and flower beds that Sarah had carefully tended now exploding with color. 6 weeks had passed since the Founders' Day celebration, 6 weeks of subtle but significant changes in the dynamics of their makeshift family. Jackson and Sarah moved through this new terrain carefully, mindful of the children's perceptiveness and the importance of allowing relationships to develop naturally. They hadn't formally announced anything to the triplets, but children have an uncanny ability to sense shifts in the emotional atmosphere. It was Emily who first addressed the elephant in the room one evening as Sarah tucked her into bed. "Are you and Mr. Jackson in love now?" she asked, her tone conversational as she clutched her favorite stuffed rabbit. Sarah paused, caught off guard by the directness of the question. "What makes you ask that, sweetheart?" Emily shrugged, a miniature replica of Sarah's own gesture. "You smile different when he's around, and he holds your hand sometimes when you think we're not looking." "You notice a lot, don't you?" Sarah said, smoothing Emily's hair away from her forehead. Ethan says it's because Mr. Jackson makes you happy, and that's good. But Elliot's worried." Sarah's heart constricted. "Worried? About what?" Emily fidgeted with her rabbit's ears. "He thinks if you love Mr. Jackson, you might not remember Daddy anymore." The simple statement hit Sarah like a physical blow. She sat on the edge of Emily's bed, gathering her thoughts before responding. "Emily, loving Mr. Jackson doesn't mean I've forgotten Daddy. Your father will always be special to me and to all of you. Nothing can ever change that." "That's what I told Elliot," Emily said matter-of-factly. "I said it's like how we have more than one flavor of ice cream in the freezer. Liking chocolate doesn't mean you stop liking vanilla." A surprised laugh escaped Sarah. "That's actually a very wise way of looking at it." "So you do love Mr. Jackson?" Emily pressed, her eyes bright with curiosity. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, I think I do, but it's still new and we're taking things slowly. Is that okay with you?" Emily considered this seriously. "Does this mean he'll be our new dad?" "Not right away," Sarah said carefully. "Getting a new dad isn't something that happens overnight. First, we all need to be sure it's what everyone wants." "I think I'd like it," Emily declared. "Mr. Jackson knows lots of good stories, and he never gets mad when we ask questions. Plus, he makes the best pancakes." "Those are excellent qualities," Sarah agreed, leaning down to kiss her daughter's forehead. "Now, time for sleep. We've got a busy day tomorrow." After checking on the boys and finding them already asleep, Sarah made her way downstairs to where Jackson sat on the porch, enjoying the cool evening breeze. She settled into the chair beside him, automatically reaching for his hand. "Emily just asked if we're in love," she said without preamble. Jackson raised an eyebrow. "And what did you tell her?" "The truth," Sarah replied simply. "She also asked if you'd be their new dad." Jackson was quiet for a moment, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "How do you feel about that possibility?" "Honestly, it scares me a little," Sarah admitted. "Not because I doubt you, but because I know how deeply the triplets can become attached. If we move forward and something went wrong—" "I understand," Jackson said, his voice gentle. "We're not just deciding for ourselves." Sarah nodded, gazing out at the darkening landscape. "Emily seems okay with the idea. Actually, she compared it to liking different flavors of ice cream." Jackson chuckled. "Smart kid." "But Elliot's worried that loving you might mean forgetting Michael," Sarah continued, the concern evident in her voice. Jackson was silent, considering her words. "Maybe I should talk to him," he finally suggested. "Man to man." Sarah turned to look at him, her heart full. "You'd do that?" "Of course," Jackson said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "His feelings matter to me, Sarah. All of their feelings do." The following afternoon, Jackson invited Elliot to help him check the fence line in the north pasture. They rode out together, Elliot proudly perched on his own pony, a gentle mare named Buttercup that Jackson had been training specifically for the children. They worked in companionable silence for a while, Jackson demonstrating how to check for loose wires and wobbly posts. Elliot proved an attentive student, his small hands surprisingly capable as he helped hammer staples back into place. As they took a break beneath a large cottonwood tree, sharing a canteen of water and the cookies Sarah had packed, Jackson decided to broach the subject that had been on his mind. "Your mom mentioned you might have some questions," he began, "about her and me." Elliot studied his boots, suddenly fascinated by a scuff on the toe. "Maybe." Jackson didn't rush him. instead breaking a cookie in half and offering Elliot the larger portion. "It's okay to have questions, you know, or even to be worried about things changing." Elliot accepted the cookie but didn't eat it immediately. "Mom says you and her like each other, like more than friends." "That's true," Jackson confirmed. "I care about your mom very much." "Did you know my dad?" Elliot asked, finally looking up. Jackson shook his head. "No, I never had the chance to meet him, but from everything your mom has told me, he was a good man who loved you and your brother and sister very much." Elliot nodded solemnly. "He used to read us bedtime stories every night, even when he was really tired from work, and he taught me how to tie my shoes." "Those sound like special memories," Jackson said quietly. "Yeah." Elliot picked at the cookie, crumbs falling onto his jeans. "Mom says we don't have to forget Dad just because you're here now." "Your mom's right," Jackson assured him, "and I would never want you to forget him. He'll always be your father, Elliot. Nothing can change that." "But if you married Mom," Elliot persisted, getting to the heart of his concern, "would you be our dad too?" Jackson took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "If, and that's a big if right now, your mom and I decided to get married. Someday, I would be honored to be a father figure in your life, but I wouldn't be replacing your dad. Think of it more like adding someone to your family, not substituting." Elliot considered this, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Like when we added the new chickens to the coop. They didn't make the old chickens go away. They just made the flock bigger." Jackson smiled, once again struck by the wisdom children could sometimes display. "That's a perfect way to think about it." "Would we have to call you Dad?" Elliot asked practically. "Only if you wanted to, and only when you felt ready," Jackson assured him. "Until then, Mr. Jackson works just fine." Elliot nodded, seeming satisfied with this answer. He finally took a bite of his cookie, chewing thoughtfully before asking, "Can we go see Thunderstar after we fix the fence? I want to check if she's getting her grown-up teeth yet." The smooth transition told Jackson more than words could have. Elliot had processed the information and was ready to move on, at least for now. "You bet. And if we finish early enough, maybe we can take Buttercup for a swim in the creek. It's plenty hot today." The afternoon unfolded in a series of small adventures, cooling off in the creek, checking on Thunderstar, and stopping to observe a family of deer at the edge of the woods. By the time they returned to the ranch house, Elliot was sunburned, mud-splattered, and utterly content, chattering about their day to anyone who would listen. That evening, as Jackson said goodnight to the triplets, Elliot surprised him by throwing his arms around his waist in a fierce hug. "Thanks for fixing the fence with me today," the boy mumbled into Jackson's shirt. Jackson's throat tightened unexpectedly as he returned the embrace. "Any time, partner. You're a natural rancher." When he joined Sarah on the porch later, he recounted the conversation, the pride in his voice unmistakable. "He's going to be okay, I think. Just needs time to adjust to the idea." Sarah leaned her head against his shoulder, her heart full. "I've been thinking about what you said before, about us taking things slow for the kids' sake. I appreciate that more than I can say." "They're part of the package," Jackson said simply. "The very best part, along with you." July brought the county fair, an event the triplets had been anticipating for weeks. Thunderstar, now 3 months old and steadier on her feet, had been entered in the foal competition. Elliot, who had appointed himself her primary caretaker under Jackson's supervision, spent hours grooming her sleek coat until it gleamed. The fairgrounds bustled with activity: livestock competitions, carnival rides, craft displays, and food. Vendors offering everything from cotton candy to deep-fried Oreos. The triplets darted from attraction to attraction, their excitement infectious as they discovered the wonders of their first country fair. Sarah found herself relaxing into the day, laughing more freely than she had in years. The weight that had pressed on her shoulders since Michael's death had gradually lifted over the months at the ranch, replaced by a growing confidence in her ability to build a good life for her children and perhaps for herself as well. Jackson moved through the crowd with easy familiarity, greeting neighbors and introducing Sarah and the triplets to people they hadn't yet met in town. There was a quiet pride in his manner as he made these introductions, a subtle claim that wasn't possessive but protective, inclusive. The Reed family entry for the foal competition should proceed to the showing ring, announced a voice over the loudspeaker. Elliot froze, his corn dog halfway to his mouth. "That's us. We gotta go." Jackson chuckled, ruffling the boy's hair. "Better finish that quick then. Can't show the Thunderstar with mustard on your face." The showing ring was already crowded with competitors when they arrived, sleek thoroughbreds, sturdy quarter horses, and elegant Arabians. Thunderstar, with her mixed lineage, wasn't the most impressive specimen, but what she lacked in pedigree, she made up for in spirit. Elliot led her around the ring, just as Jackson had taught him, his small face a study in concentration. The judge, an elderly man with a silver mustache, asked each competitor questions about their foals, birth dates, parentage, care routines. When he reached Elliot, the judge's stern expression softened slightly. "And who might you be, young man?" "Elliot Mitchell, sir," he replied, standing as tall as his 8-year-old frame would allow. "This is Thunderstar. She was born during the big storm in May. I've been helping take care of her since day one." "Is that so?" the judge asked, crouching, to examine the foal more closely. "And what special care does she require?" Without hesitation, Elliot launched into a detailed explanation of Thunderstar's feeding schedule, exercise regimen, and grooming routine. His knowledge was impressive, clearly the result of careful study and hands-on experience under Jackson's guidance. The judge listened attentively, occasionally nodding his approval. When Elliot finished, he straightened up with a thoughtful expression. "You've done a fine job with this filly, young man. She's healthy, well-mannered, and clearly bonded to you. That's no small achievement." The results were announced an hour later. Thunderstar didn't win the overall competition. That honor went to a gleaming black thoroughbred from a professional breeding farm. But Elliot beamed with pride when Thunderstar was awarded a special ribbon for Most Promising Youth Handler. "Did you see that, Mr. Jackson?" he exclaimed, clutching the blue ribbon. "The judge said I did a good job." He was right. Jackson agreed, his voice rough with emotion. "I couldn't have done better myself." Later, as the sun began to set and the fairground lights twinkled to life, they found a quiet spot away from the crowds to enjoy the homemade fried chicken Sarah had packed. For dinner, the triplets, exhausted but happy, leaned against their mother as they ate, occasionally pointing out particularly exciting rides or attractions they wanted to visit before leaving. "This has been the best day ever," Ethan declared, his glasses slightly askew from an enthusiastic turn on the tilt-a-whirl. "Better than Christmas?" Sarah asked teasingly. "Way better," Emily confirmed, "because we're all together." The simple statement hung in the air, its significance not lost on the adults. Jackson caught Sarah's eye over the children's heads, his expression soft with unspoken emotion. After dinner, as Bill took the triplets for one last circuit of the carnival games, Jackson and Sarah wandered toward the bandstand, where local musicians were setting up for the evening dance. "Emily's right, you know," Sarah said, as they found a bench slightly removed from the gathering crowd. "Being together like this, it feels like family," Jackson finished when she hesitated. Sarah nodded, leaning into his side as his arm came around her shoulders. "I've been thinking about what you said at Founders Day, about building something permanent here." Jackson tensed slightly beside her. "And?" And I think we're already doing it, Sarah said softly. Day by day. It may not be conventional, but it feels right. It does, Jackson agreed, his voice low and earnest. More right than anything has felt in a very long time. Sarah turned to face him, her expression serious. I'm not suggesting we rush into anything. The triplets are still adjusting, and we're still getting to know each other. But I want you to know that when you're ready to ask that question for real, not just hypothetically, my answer will be yes. Jackson's eyes widened, a slow smile spreading across his face. Sarah Mitchell, are you proposing to me? Not exactly. She echoed his words from Founder's Day, a teasing light in her eyes. Not yet, but I am telling you that's a direction I'm definitely open to, when the time is right. Jackson laughed, the sound rich and full, drawing curious glances from passers-by. He leaned forward, resting his forehead against hers. I think I'm falling in love with you, he whispered, admitting both vulnerability and strength. I think I'm already there, Sarah replied, her heart overflowing with a joy she'd thought never to feel again. Their kiss was interrupted by the sound of small feet running toward them and Emily's excited voice calling, Mom, Mr. Jackson, Bill, won us the biggest stuffed bear ever. It's taller than Ethan. As the triplets descended upon them, chattering and laughing, Sarah met Jackson's eyes over Emily's head. The connection between them, a tangible thing, a promise of futures aligning, of separate lives becoming irrevocably intertwined. August brought the start of Sarah's first class at Pine Tree Community College, Business Administration 101, Tuesday and Thursday evenings from 6 to 8. Her initial nervousness quickly gave way to enthusiasm as she discovered her aptitude for the material and the satisfaction of engaging her mind in ways that parenting and ranch work, fulfilling as they were, didn't always allow. It's like rediscovering a part of myself I'd forgotten existed, she explained to Jackson one evening as they sat on the porch, her textbook open between them. Jackson nodded thoughtfully. Your eyes light up when you talk about it. Different than when you talk about ranch work. Not better, just different, Sarah clarified. I love learning about both. The triplets, fascinated by their mother's return to school, insisted on homework time alongside her, setting up their coloring books and reading materials at the kitchen table while she studied. Even though school wouldn't resume for them, until after Labor Day, they seemed to enjoy the routine and the sense of shared purpose. One particularly warm evening in late August found the entire family down at the creek that ran through the eastern edge of the property. The children splashed in the shallow water, while Sarah and Jackson sat on a blanket in the shade, enjoying a moment of relative peace. I had a call from Jim Barnes today, Jackson mentioned casually, watching as Bill taught the triplets how to skip stones across the water's surface. He's thinking of retiring next year, selling the feed store. Sarah glanced at him, noting the contemplative expression on his face. Oh? Is he moving away? No, staying in town. But his knees are giving him trouble, and his wife wants to travel more. Jackson picked up a blade of grass, twirling it between his fingers. He asked if I might be interested in buying the business. Sarah sat up straighter, her attention fully engaged. Are you? Jackson shrugged, but the gesture was anything but casual. Hadn't thought about it before. But with the ranch running more efficiently these days, and you taking those business classes, might be worth considering. It would diversify your income, Sarah observed. Less reliance on cattle prices. Our income, Jackson corrected gently. And yes, that's one advantage. Plus the store turns a steady profit. Jim's been careful with his books, showed me the numbers. Sarah studied him, reading between the lines of his seemingly casual conversation. You're seriously considering this, aren't you? Jackson nodded slowly. Been thinking about the future a lot lately. What it might look like. Ways to build something that could support, well, all of us, for the long term. The implication wasn't lost on Sarah. You're planning ahead, for a family. Our family, Jackson confirmed, meeting her eyes directly. If that's still something you want. Sarah's heart swelled with emotion. It is, she said simply. Very much. Jackson reached for her hand, interlacing their fingers. There's something else, he said, his voice dropping slightly. Something I've been meaning to ask you. Sarah held her breath, sensing the importance of the moment. Yes, from his pocket, Jackson withdrew a small velvet box. This was my grandmother's, he explained, opening it to reveal a vintage engagement ring, a modest diamond flanked by 2 sapphires in an intricate gold setting. My mother wore it until the day she died. I've been keeping it in the safe, thinking it was just a family heirloom. Now I realize it was waiting for the right person. Sarah gasped softly, her free hand flying to her mouth. I know we said we'd take things slow, Jackson continued, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. And we still can. This doesn't have to change our timeline. But I wanted you to have this as a promise, that whenever you're ready, whenever the kids are ready, I'm here, all in. Tears filled Sarah's eyes as she looked from the ring to Jackson's face. It's beautiful, she whispered. And yes, whenever we're all ready, my answer is yes. As Jackson slipped the ring onto her finger, a chorus of splashing announced the approach of 3 wet, excited children, drawn by the intensity of the moment, even if they didn't understand its full significance. What's that? Emily asked, pointing to the ring now glittering on Sarah's finger. Sarah and Jackson exchanged a glance, a silent conversation passing between them. With a small nod, Sarah turned to her children, gathering them close despite their damp state. Mr. Jackson has asked me a very important question, she explained gently. He's asked if someday, when we're all ready, I would marry him and we could be a family together. What did you say? Ethan asked, his expression serious behind water-splattered glasses. I said yes, Sarah replied, watching their faces carefully. But only if you 3 are okay with it too. We're a package deal, remember? The triplets exchanged glances, one of those mysterious silent communications that multiple birth siblings often share. It was Elliot who spoke first, addressing Jackson directly. Would you be our dad then? For real? Jackson nodded, his expression solemn. I would be honored to be your dad, if that's something you'd want. I'd want that, Emily said immediately. I already told Mom ages ago. Me too, Ethan agreed. You know lots of cool stuff, and you're teaching us things all the time, like a dad should. All eyes turned to Elliot, who was studying Jackson with an intensity beyond his years. You promise you won't ever forget our first dad, even if you're our new one? I promise, Jackson said firmly. We'll always remember him and the love he had for you. That's a sacred thing, Elliot. Nothing will ever change it. Elliot nodded once, decision made. Then, okay, but I might not call you Dad right away. I might need to practice it first. Jackson smiled, ruffling the boy's damp hair. Take all the time you need, partner. There's no rush. From the creek bank, Bill called out, Does this mean I finally get to plan a wedding? Been waiting 30 years to see this ranch host a proper celebration. Laughter rippled through the family circle as Bill joined them, clapping Jackson on the shoulder with gruff affection. About time, son. Your parents would be mighty pleased. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting golden light across the meadow, Sarah looked around at the faces of these people who had become her family. Jackson, steady and true, Bill, gruff but loving, and her children, resilient and thriving in ways she could never have imagined during those dark days after Michael's death. The journey that had begun in desperation on a snowy night had led them here, to this moment of promise and possibility, to a future none of them could have foreseen, but that now stretched before them, bright with hope and shared dreams. The widow who had collapsed in the snow had found more than shelter in the lone cowboy's care. She had found a new beginning, a chance to build something beautiful from the ashes of loss, and the cowboy who had built a fire to warm them that first night had ultimately kindled something far more enduring. The flames of a family forged, not by blood, but by choice, by love, and by the courage to begin again. The ranch glowed with strings of twinkling lights, transforming the weathered barn into a rustic cathedral. Inside, hay bales covered in white linen served as pews, and mason jars filled with wildflowers hung from the rafters. A handcrafted wooden arch, adorned with sunflowers and native grasses, stood at the front where Jackson waited, uncharacteristically nervous in a new suit. Bill, serving as best man, adjusted Jackson's tie with surprising gentleness. "Your father would have been proud of this day," he murmured. "Both your parents would." Before Jackson could respond, the old guitar player from town began a melody that silenced the gathered guests. Emily appeared first, radiant in a yellow dress, scattering flower petals with deliberate concentration. Ethan and Elliot followed, matching in miniature versions of Jackson's suit, carefully bearing a small wooden box between them. When Sarah appeared in the doorway, Jackson's breath caught. She wore a simple ivory dress, her hair crowned with a wreath of wildflowers, but it was her smile, confident and joyful, that transformed her. This wasn't the desperate woman who had collapsed in the snow with 3 frightened children. This was a woman who had found her strength, her purpose, and her home. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful. The triplets stood beside them as Sarah and Jackson exchanged vows they had written themselves. When the minister asked for the rings, Ethan and Elliot stepped forward with their wooden box. Inside nestled 3 rings, one for Sarah, one for Jackson, and a third, smaller ring that puzzled the guests. Jackson knelt down to the triplets' level, his voice carrying in the hushed barn. "Sarah and I are making promises to each other today, but I have promises for you 3 as well." He took the smaller ring from the box. "This is a promise that I will always be here for you, as a father, a friend, and a guide. I will honor the memory of your father while helping you build your futures, and I will love you as my own, now and always." The 3 children solemnly placed their hands together, and Jackson slipped the ring onto a delicate chain. With tender care, he hung it on a nail hammered into the wooden arch. "This will hang in our home," he explained, "as a reminder of the promises we made today, not just between Sarah and me, but between all 5 of us." There wasn't a dry eye in the barn as the pastor pronounced them husband and wife. As they sealed their union with a kiss, a cheer erupted from the gathered community, the same people who had witnessed their journey from strangers to family over the past 18 months. The reception unfolded in the meadow beside the creek, tables laden with food contributed by neighbors and friends. The feed store, now jointly owned by Jackson and Sarah, had closed for the day, with a handwritten sign in the window, "Gone to join 2 families, back tomorrow." Sarah found a quiet moment alone with her children as the celebration continued. Around them, "How are you 3 feeling?" she asked, mindful that even happy changes could be overwhelming. "Happy," Emily said immediately. "And hungry. Can I have more cake?" After dinner, Sarah laughed, turning to her sons. "Ethan, Elliot?" Ethan adjusted his glasses, thoughtful as always. "I like that Jackson made promises to us too. That was special." Elliot nodded in agreement. "And I've been practicing," he added cryptically. "Practicing what, sweetie?" Sarah asked. "This." Elliot took a deep breath, then called out, "Hey, Dad, can you show Mr. Barnes how I can ride Thunderstar now?" Jackson turned at the sound, his face registering first surprise, then undisguised joy at the title Elliot had used. He crossed to them in a few quick strides, crouching to meet Elliot's eyes. "I'd be honored to show him," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Does this mean—" "I'm ready," Elliot stated simply. "You keep your promises. That's what dads do." Jackson gathered the boy into a fierce hug, his eyes meeting Sarah's over Elliot's head. The unspoken communication between them had only strengthened with time, a shared understanding that even in this moment of joy, they both acknowledged the bittersweet nature of new beginnings, built on painful endings. Later, as evening fell, and lanterns illuminated the celebration, Bill tapped a spoon against his glass, calling for attention. The old foreman, usually taciturn, surveyed the gathering with evident satisfaction. "Not one for speeches," he began gruffly. "But some things need saying. This ranch has stood for 4 generations, weathered blizzards, droughts, hard times, and good. But a ranch isn't just land and cattle, it's people, family." He gestured to Jackson and Sarah, who stood surrounded by the triplets. "Year and a half ago, this place was just surviving, like its owner." Appreciative laughter rippled through the crowd at Bill's gentle teasing. Then a winter storm brought 5 lives crashing together, and something remarkable happened. Not just survival, but growth. New life. Bill raised his glass. To Jackson and Sarah Reed, to Ethan, Emily, and Elliot, and to the power of second chances. As glasses clinked and cheers rose, Jackson leaned close to Sarah's ear. "Did I ever tell you I stopped believing in second chances after my parents died? Thought life was just about enduring, not rebuilding." Sarah turned into his embrace, her eyes reflecting the lantern light. "And now I know better," he murmured, his forehead resting against hers. "Now I know that sometimes what looks like the end is really just the beginning. That sometimes a family isn't born, it's built, choice by choice, day by day." "From the ashes," Sarah whispered. "From the snow," Jackson corrected with a smile. Beyond them, Thunderstar grazed peacefully in the pasture alongside Buttercup. So, Chicken Coop, now expanded to house 12 hens, stood beside a thriving vegetable garden that fed not only their family, but supplied the local farmers' market. The east wing of the house had been fully integrated into their living space, its rooms filled with the evidence of 5 intertwined lives: school books, ranch ledgers, toys and treasures. From disaster had come deliverance. From loss had come love. And from a desperate trek through snow had come a journey that none of them could have imagined on that winter night. A journey that had only just begun. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.